Good afternoon. Today is Monday, the 4th of November, 2024, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. Delighted to be joined today by Alex Thomson from the Netherlands and Ben Rubin, who will be joining us from London. Well, my goodness, lots of things happening in the world. The bloodshed carries on, of course, in Ukraine and the Middle East, and it appears that no Western country wants to talk peace. It's only for more war. And we've got some very interesting elections coming up in the United States. But we're seeing interesting things unfold in the UK. So, Ben, welcome to the news today. I think you've got a little bit on the Conservative Party.
Indeed. Brian, Alex, great to be here. So the British Conservative Party, the party of Churchill, the party of Thatcher, the party leader, Olukemi, Olufunto, Adegoke, Badenoch. Kemi Badenoch. And obviously, given this is 2024, former Tory cabinet ministers are using it as an opportunity to score points in the cheap identity politics game that has replaced our political discourse. Here we can see James Cleverly taunting the Labour Party about how male, pale and stale they are when compared to the illustrious melanated femininity of his new boss, the new Tory leader. Not to be outdone, we saw Labour's Dawn Butler, who I've been speaking about a lot recently, compare Badenoch to the blackface of white supremacy, which is quite a remarkable statement. Make that make sense. I don't think you can. And also getting in on the act, we saw Lord Simon Woolley, a Labour peer, remarkably stepping in to take personal responsibility for the elevation of the new Tory leader. Here saying that I feel that Operation Black Vote that he founded can again take some credit. Now, who is Kemi Badenoch? Well, she's a Nigerian woman. She tells us that. She said that herself. And one does have to ask at this point, what is the Conservative Party conserving exactly? More importantly, the party is now led by someone else with an extraordinarily close and troubling tie to the World Economic Forum. Here she is, looking quite awkward, I think, actually. Stood in front of the World Economic Forum logo at Davos in 2023 in a formal capacity as a Conservative minister at the time. Now, what do we know about the World Economic Forum? Well, they're very proud of penetrating the cabinets and shadow cabinets of nation states. Klaus Schwab here very proudly talking about his ability to penetrate the cabinets. And that means, unfortunately, that we still have no serious political opposition in this country. There's no serious opposition to the global policy agenda being put forward by every part of the international system that we talk about on a weekly basis, including the unprecedented assault on British farmers that we saw last week, which was spoken about on the news over the past few days, which was beautifully described on Twitter by Morgoth, who said that modern leftists are so retarded they see taxes on farmers as sticking it to the moneyed elite and not merely a ploy to break them so the actual moneyed elite can take their land. Moneyed elite like this man, Bill Gates, who is a close friend and collaborator with Klaus Schwab. We see Bill Gates here just 2 weeks ago in Downing Street with Keir Starmer, with a Ukraine flag, interestingly, prominently positioned between them. This stuff is not done accidentally, and we know that Ukraine is the test bed for the new digital global governance model that's being rolled out by the World Economic Forum. And we also know that Bill Gates is the biggest farmland owner in the US, no doubt with ambitions to be the same in the UK. The New York Post here telling us the real reason why Bill Gates is now the US's biggest farmland owner. I don't think because he's a nice guy and he wants to keep us well fed and well nourished. And there's not going to be any opposition to this because Starmer's on side and no doubt Kemi Badenoch will be too.
Ben, thanks very much for that. I'd I think I'd just like to say to our audience that UK Column is pushing and pushing for people to see through the national politics and to look at the power base that is driving policy and people in UK within our political structure. But of course, this is happening throughout nation states in Europe. And we've also got the same sort of power base operating through the US. So the important thing is to focus on where policies are coming from and who's driving it, rather than the immediate effects of the policy. And we're going to keep pushing this to encourage as many people as possible to look behind the curtains, as it were, and see who's really pulling the strings. Alex, let's bring you in, because we can mention Bill Gates in reference to his links to British politics, or of course American politics, but we can also have a look at his effect in Europe. Welcome.
Thank you. Greetings, gentlemen, and greetings, viewers. I think I will just hand over to Ben in a moment, because he has a video to play us before we talk about Bill Gates on my segment. But as we've just been mentioning the juvenility, melanimity, and femininity of the new leader of His Majesty's loyal opposition, I wonder whether we can get the name better pronounced than most of the media. It should be Badenoch with a silent E. And I'm just waiting for the Continentals to start calling her Madam Badenoch. But anyway, I will just briefly defer to Ben, because I think he had something else to play for us before my segment.
No, you're okay, Alex. That
well.
Video will appear a little bit later in the news.
So, Bill Gates showed unique arrogance in the Dutch court case that most of our viewers will have heard of. We covered it in Extra Time recently once. This court case is what the Dutch call a bodemprocedure, roughly translated as a trial on the merits, and it goes to a court of first instance, a rechtbank, in this case for the Northern Netherlands. And you'll find all the show notes links for these various documents, but here is a good auto translation, or I think human translation actually, of the most recent finding in mid-August from that court in the Dutch province of Friesland, or Frisia, which is not as sensational as it seems to be. The case named Gates and one other non-Dutch resident, namely Albert Bourla, CEO of Pfizer, among a slew of Dutch officials and politicians, as having been culpable for deliberately inflicting harm on the Dutch population through the COVID jabs. And so they're taking this case as a tort under Dutch civil law, which incidentally hangs on just one article of the Dutch Civil Code, I think Book 1, Article 62 or 162 from memory. And the Dutch, because they don't have common law, have to hang the whole of tort law, when you've been wronged without a contract, on this one article. But be that as it may, the court has, in its preliminary hearing, found that Gates is not immune and outside the jurisdiction of the Netherlands. They have applied here because the Frisians up north, this is a master move by the lawyers moving this case on behalf of 7 named jab victims. They knew that the courts in the north of the Netherlands are pretty independent-minded people, and the court rigorously applied the EU's agreement called Brussels 1 bis to determine whether you can sue Bill Gates or anyone else who doesn't live in the Netherlands from the Netherlands. And they found that he did because of the presence of an anchor defendant at the top of the list of respondents. Defendants it would be if it was criminal, but these are respondents. And the chap at the top of the list lives in Frisia or Friesland, and that is a doctor of medical background called Mr. Not Hoekstra, I forget the exact name, but a similar name to that, who coordinated the Dutch government's medical response to COVID to some extent. So he's dismissively said, unlike Mr. Bourla, oh, you don't have standing to try me. I don't have anything to do with Dutch justice. And they have said, well, because Mr. Gates, unlike even Bourla, didn't deign to send a note back explaining his position, the others all asked for extra time to send their legal briefs in to defend themselves. Gates has got legal fees to pay. So that's the first bloody nose that he gets here. And we see that this has been signed mid-October by the griffier, or the clerk of the court. I must stress that as things go up the Dutch justice system, as in every other country, the chances of being nobbled increasingly are prominent, present. But knowing the Frisians, as I do, I think that you couldn't have found more independent-minded people. And a lot of our viewers tend to think common law, hooray, continental law, yah boo, and I understand the reasons for that. But you have to look at the individual context. There is some hope, in my judgment at this stage, that this might go places and that at least it might flush out some of Bill Gates's arrogance in the matter and cause him to be more evasive and wrong-foot him, perhaps, to some extent. Here, and this will be in the show note links as well, the foundation, the NGO, as it were, which is moving this matter using two very, very sharp-minded lawyers in the northern Netherlands, has put together an expanding collection of court documents. These are good auto-translations. If you go to the website, which I should display to you now, which is rechtoprecht.online/incident-gates, that will be in the show notes too. And if you go to the bottom left-hand corner with that yellow and white translate button, you will find where the American flag is, an English translation of the documents as things evolve. The show notes will also contain write-ups in Dutch and English, and the Dutch ones will be run through an auto-translator by Kenny as he puts the show notes together for you to follow what's going on here. One of the things that the lawyers moving this matter on behalf of the 7 representative COVID jab victims have pointed out is that the Dutch government is trying to put this in the corner of rhetoric and how dangerous that we have people questioning the narrative in these days. But look, things are going on. There is such a thing as UVABICO, which apparently stands for Europe Vaccinated Beyond COVID, or very similar wording to that. And Brian, I know we have to keep this segment pretty short, but you might, as I put this on screen, like to zoom in on the method in that second paragraph there under the project heading. What method can you see here that the people involved in this multi-EU member state initiative to keep people jabbed with genetic modification products, what method are they using to reach consensus?
Well, happy to help you out there because it's the Delphi panel method, which of course is something that we started to talk about again. I think it was a couple of weeks ago, Alex, but previously, going back to the earliest days, over 10 years ago, the UK column was warning about government's use of Delphi techniques in order to take a group of individuals and get them to produce the outcome that the government or the agency wanted in the first place.
And the point is that jabism, Covidianism, or post-Covidianism is going native in Europe. We know that Bourla has sent withheld text messages to Ursula von der Leyen, who's now tying herself over to head a second term as at the European Commission. We don't know the outcome of that. It remains to be seen whether Bill Gates gets slapped on the wrist by a notably independent-minded Dutch judge, or whether that gets kicked into the long grass as it goes up the chain. But here you see that several EU member states, not involving the Netherlands in this case, have actually, or rather on the previous item, you saw that they are continuing to insist that people go for modification injections as the standard response to any health crises that may be declared. And now on screen, we see Patiëntmacht's article on Substack detailing, and we have had hints of this before, but this write-up that comes at an opportune moment. We knew that this was rumbling along, but it seems to be contested more now, that when the Dutch government was required under freedom of information and interest of research legislation to disclose its vaccine harms database, the CIMS database, which is the master database of the medical issues arising from jabs in the Netherlands, inter alia, they deleted, just getting on for 1 million vaccination records in a country of fewer than 20 million people. Okay, some of them are double jab people, but a significant proportion of the population, removing them on the basis that you don't want to know about these people because after they got jabbed, they died or they emigrated. So clearly there's nothing to see there. This is causing a political stink now that the Dutch cabinet has changed. And just in a few second whoosh over what's happening next door in Germany, we see here that NOZ reports that 1/6 of Germans, an extrapolated figure from a good poll, have said that they have side effects after a COVID jab. That is written up in English by this excellent blog, Defuckle 2.0. You can read about that with added amplification by Epimetheus there. You can also see that the eastern, somewhat conservative state of Saxony, where the AFD is polling high and may end up running the State House at some point, is going to have a parliamentary committee of inquiry over COVID, which some Central European countries nearly next door, including Slovakia and to some extent Hungary, have already said they want to do. So there may be a belt of European states and subnational jurisdictions, including even the Netherlands now, that say we actually do want to find out what happened with COVID jabs. And they may get quite a long way before the executive and the New World Order at that level can squash them. If people want to know what's happening while we're on Germany, on C.J. Hopkins, who was put on trial for, we now know it was for insufficiently clarifying that he was being ironic when he said that the German COVID response and state nowadays were like the Nazis. The Daily Skeptic has got a very good 40-minute interview, which will be in the show notes. And we'll just put in a couple of things by Eugippius, who's always well worth suggesting to people. One is that the Vice-Chancellor, the equivalent of Deputy Prime Minister at federal level, Herr Habeck, wants a comprehensive internet censorship program to stop people disagreeing with him. And the other by Eugippius is that by the end of the year, there may be a motion moved in the Bundestag to ban Alternative für Deutschland, so that less of this pesky spirit is demonstrated in public.
Alex, thank you very much. Fascinating. Same sort of policies appearing in Germany or Holland or America. So this is globalist policy that we're watching. And of course, they don't want people reporting on what they're doing. So continued calls for clampdown on free speech and alternative new media sources. Well, I just want to what do I want to say? Thank you to a UK column viewer for pointing this little document out to me. Clearly, they've been watching Ben's reports, but this is Demos. It's called Plugging the Black Hole, Reforming Inheritance Tax to Unlock Revenue and Build Public Sector Support. So we're just going to highlight here that the reality is that Keir Starmer and the Labour Party are not producing policy. It's being produced behind the scenes, and Demos, of course, or the Fabians, are key drivers of that policy. This is just a fraction of the detail in this particular Demos document, but you could say, well, it's purely a coincidence that Demos says it's been working on this, and then, hey presto, it becomes Keir Starmer's Labour policy. But if we go further into the document, it says this report is part of Demos's multi-year Unlocking Inheritance Programme supported by ABRDN Financial Fairness Trust. Well, if you don't know who that trust is, you're talking about the former Standard Life. And so we've got the big corporation interests, the big money men working with Demos, and clearly they've been working over a number of years to help drive the policy, which by pure coincidence has now come in through the Labour Party. Now, the other thing I got over the weekend was an Institute of Government email. This is just part of it. So the weekend's papers will be packed with insider accounts of the budget and deep dives into the Chancellor's decisions. So the Institute of Government tries to make out that if you read their articles, this is all policy that's come out of the government. But of course, we've just seen better. I decided to have a look at the lady that put her signature to the email, and it's Dr. Hannah White. She's the director of the Institute of Government. And she had this to say about her own institute. In just over a decade, the Institute for Government has built an unrivaled reputation for rigorous, independent research and expert analysis, repeatedly proving the importance of its mission to make government more effective. Well, I'm going to suggest that's not what they're trying to do. They're trying to do something else. We'll come on to that. In these challenging times, our mission is more essential than ever, and I look forward to leading our fantastic team in making government work better for everyone. Well, the clue is when you go and have a look at her, because she's involved as trustee of the public engagement charity Involve. Sorry, that's disappeared off the bottom of your screen a little bit there, but you can see it. And when I went to have a look at Involve, the first person I looked at was one of the trustees, Andrew Cave. And what did I spot that drew my attention? Well, he's an independent director at the Sortition Foundation, and he's working to adopt citizens' assemblies. And Ben, I can see you laughing, so I'll just bring you back on screen for the audience. This is all purely a coincidence. I just happen to have stumbled on what these people are really doing, which is changing politics. What do you think?
I think that in the UK and also in the US, that there is a deliberate attempt right now to break the traditional political discourse and the political institutions that have been built up over centuries, and to replace them with something new. And sortition and citizens' assemblies are the method through which that's going to be attempted.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, and we will stay on the case. UK Column will stay on the case. Let's get back to Involve. The next place I always go is funding, but this one really caught my attention. Let's have a look at who funded us in 2022-23. Income over £5,000, and it looks very small, so I'll help you out and bring it up on screen because it's the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds. And they've ploughed in over £500,000 for the People's Plan for Nature. Let's just highlight that because the text will be a little bit small for people to see. So it's £549,011, all to do with the People's Plan for Nature, and this is the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds. If we go on through, who else have we got? Well, we've got the old favourites, Open Society Foundation, Esme Fairbairn, Gulbenkian, people need to pay attention to that little group, Forum for the Future, Joseph Rowntree and the Royal Society of the Arts. And if we go on a little bit more, I was also amazed to see that Devon County Council was in the mix somewhere with £146,940, which was tied into the Devon Climate Assembly. This is where you can see the growth of non-traditional governance bases. So we're talking citizens' assemblies. Nobody's asked for them, but they're being created. And if I just bring this one back on screen, probably for Mike Robinson, really, because this is the People's Plan for Nature. It says, add your voice to the People's Plan. The people have spoken. Now, everyone needs to act. Together we can make this plan too big to ignore. Well, of course, nobody's been consulted, but apparently you've all spoken. I'm not sure when you did it. Perhaps you'd like to tell us. But the clue is down here. Because who have we got? The World Wildlife Fund, working in partnership with the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds and the National Trust. And Alex, I'll just ask you to respond on this one. It's been very interesting, but over a number of years, I've been hearing from more and more people that they think the National Trust has drifted away from its original objectives of preserving interesting historic property and land in the UK. And actually, they've become a very powerful tool of the globalist movement, particularly as far as the environment's concerned. Do you think that's a bit harsh?
No, I don't think it's harsh at all, Brian, because it's becoming obvious through the seepage of talking points from NGO world, think tank world, what should we say, the tax-exempt foundations talking points into politics and the legacy press, the access media, we now call them. It's becoming obvious from that there's this big talking point being pushed now that land is the source of wealth and land is how you get people by the short and curlies, to be frank. The National Trust, from personal friends in Bedfordshire going back 30 years, was going woke. We didn't have that term back in the 90s, 80s, but even then they were doing things to volunteers and even their paid staff that were getting in the direction of wokeness. And now they do seem to think they have a bully pulpit. As usual, Scotland leads the pack here. And you see, if you read the Scottish press in the last few days, they're talking about a land tax there. And they're openly saying, including the cheerleaders in the access media or legacy press, that this is great because land is the greatest source of untapped wealth in a nation. But that doesn't mean getting wealth in for the public funds, of course. That means dangling people's own wealth against them, cantilevering their own legacy and heritage against themselves.
Yeah, Alex, thank you very much for that. And just to end the segment, I couldn't resist popping this up. It's the BBC News reporting that the royal estates receive millions from public bodies and charities. Well, I think we've all known that. But let's just remember the good old Duchy of Cornwall in the background there. If you don't know what that's about, it's a private estate established in 1337, which funds the public, charitable and private activities of the Prince of Wales and his family. So originally the King, of course, it's now moved on to the Prince of Wales. But what are we talking about? We're talking about very powerful estate, millions and millions of pounds coming in. But it also appears with strong connections through to the World Economic Forum and the National Trust. we'll have to talk about that more on another occasion, but I think it all brings us back to our look at the Green King. Now, if you like what the UK column is doing, we do need your financial support. Without money coming in, we cannot run the column, and more importantly, we cannot expand. So have a look online. You can always make a donation to us. You can take out a membership or an annual membership. We're particularly keen to receive more of those, and as some people do, they become a lifetime member. So have a look online. You can also buy in our shop to help us. And of course, one of the things that people are very keen on are the health products through our association with Clive de Carle. So that is that. Please share the information. We're putting out a lot of interviews, for example, plus articles. You have the opportunity to share these and make comments as a member. And I'll just say that tomorrow at 1 o'clock, we've got an interview where I was speaking to a lady. This is some months ago. She'd come over from New Zealand, but is talking about the horrors that are going on in the political and COVID realms in New Zealand. And this Thursday, an interesting interview with Justin Walker on the subject of a Treasury letter. This is the start of, I think, something very big, because the Treasury doesn't want to respond properly. But there we are. If you like what we're doing, support us financially. Without that financial support, we cannot keep the UK column going. Ben, let's bring you back in, and I think you're going to kick off with a video.
A new health crisis for us all to be terrified about, and its name is climate change. Let's find out more.
Increasingly, climate change is harming people's health. You could say it's the largest health emergency of our time, and I do need to be ready to help tackle this challenge.
Having climate and health training as part of our curriculum will equip us with the knowledge and skills to both prevent and respond to health impacts of climate change.
That's why we're establishing the European Network on Climate and Health Education to increase teaching on this critical subject in medical schools across Europe and beyond.
This network will enhance our ability to collaborate and share best practices across universities.
This new European network expands the reach of the global consortium on climate and health education, deepening cross-continental collaboration and strengthening academic training in Europe.
Today's healthcare professionals are increasingly on the front line of climate change.
That's why health leaders from across the public and private sectors are coming together to support this transformative new network.
This new collaboration will help train the next generation of medics with the skills they need to treat the health impacts of climate change and deliver more sustainable healthcare.
Through this network, we will ensure there's greater education on this critical topic.
Right now, many universities across the world don't teach about the health impacts of climate change. This leaves a gap in our knowledge and readiness to help patients. I'm inspired to see that this is changing.
So that was the European Network on Climate and Health Education. It's a new body that has been set up to embed climate into the heart of medical education across Europe. Absolutely amazing what they're doing here. So the message was delivered, as we saw, by these three young women. And I think this is quite telling, actually. I'm just going to do a little bit of analysis of the video because I think it's quite interesting to look into how this stuff is communicated to us. And the first thing that really jumped out at me is that none of the future medics are European. They're not native Europeans. We've got non-native women, very young women, delivering this message to us, right? So we've got Maha Alatham, Esther Nagoy, and Samaya Arfan, who are being presented as the future clinicians, right? That's a very, very specific subset here being used to deliver this message to us. And by the way, ladies, this isn't a criticism of you. I think you've been tricked into participating in a propaganda exercise, not least by your professors. So we've got this guy in McGuinness at the University of Glasgow. We've got Francesco Svelto from the University of Pavia, Claudia Tradel-Hoffman from the University of Augsburg. So these are all European institutions, and this is a European network, but actually it seems like it's an international network as well. So this is Cecilia Sorensen from Colombia, which is in New York. And you can also see that there is the UN SDG iconography in the background, right? So this is about delivering the Sustainable Development Goals as much as it is about protecting people's health, right? Now, it's also a money-making operation. Let's be really honest about this. So who else have we got in the picture? Paul Hudson, who's the chief executive of Sanofi, Dame Emma Walmsley at GSK, talking about health leaders needing to come together to fight climate change. We're all on the front line of climate change now. We've got Pascal Soriot, the CEO of AstraZeneca, training the next generation. Right, so this is the pharmaceutical industry training the next generation of clinicians, ultimately to deliver pharmaceuticals into the arms, into the bodies of patients. Lurking in the background, amongst all of these universities, we can see the Sustainable Markets Initiative, Terra Carta, which means this whole thing is being coordinated under the auspices of the King.
Okay, Ben, it's all becoming a bit obvious once you know where to look. And I just challenge some members of our chat box, opposed to our wider audience, because people watch the subject areas and they pick up that these organisations and people are talking nonsense and it's rubbish. No. What these people are doing, unbelievably dangerous, and we have to take it very seriously and call it out as serious. If you dismiss it as rubbish and nonsense, people don't pick up that these are the bodies and people driving the global policies that are now doing the damage. Let's move on to the subject of war, and what better place to go than the propaganda machine of the UK Ministry of Defence, which is called Defence Intelligence. And I'm just giving an example here. If we pick up about what they're saying at the moment, they are still claiming that the Russians are not really doing anything on the battlefield. They can't really advance. They're unable to consolidate. They've picked Chasiv Yar, which is one area of the front where the Russians have actually been quiet, reasonably quiet, for some time. But that's because they have been hammering other parts of the front where they're certainly not being quiet. But the little post said from mid-July 2024 until recently, Russian forces have been unable to cross the canal due to extensive defensive measures taken by the Ukrainian armed forces. This is twisting the facts of what's happening on the ground, and essentially the UK Ministry of Defence is deceiving the British public by omission. Now, apologies, I didn't label this graph. I got it through a social media source, which I absolutely trust. This is talking about Russia's net weekly territorial gains in Ukraine. And if you look at the last week on the graph, we've got 200 square kilometres taken, but according to the Ministry of Defence in UK, the Russians are barely moving on the ground. So the reality is, of course, that in many places, particularly in the Donbass, Ukrainian defences are starting to collapse, and as they retreat, the Russians can take more ground. So Russia is clearly advancing, and we can find accurate reports. This is Reuters here. Russia takes 2 Ukrainian towns as it advances at a faster pace in a year. Now, the town in that picture, I believe, is Ugledar, which was a very highly fortified city area in Ukraine, so high-rise buildings on a very flat plain, very difficult to take. The Russians did try and attack it, failed. Subsequently, they simply bypassed it and moved on. And of course, Ugledar is now in the dust of the Russian advance. But let's have a little look at what the UK Ministry of Defence has been up to recently. We've got a video clip here.
Today, Britain and Germany have signed a landmark defence agreement that will boost security across Europe and NATO at a time of rising threats. It's the most important agreement we've signed in generations.
It will create a change in our armed forces, bringing them closer together and making them stronger. The agreement is also going to support our economies and defence industries.
Together, we're going to strengthen air defences and develop new long-range strike systems. We'll ensure our forces are interconnected and start working to produce drones that can operate alongside our tanks, our planes, our warships.
We will cooperate in anti-submarine warfare capabilities with German planes operating episodically from the UK. Together we will strengthen NATO's eastern flank, which is very important to me personally as well. Our armies will train and exercise together, and we will pool the things we all need: logistics, supplies, etc.
And we'll step up our support to Ukraine. We'll do that for as long as it takes. Together, we will ensure Ukraine prevails.
Because together we are stronger.
Gemeinsam sind wir stärker.
Very good.
Well, very telling video clip. If viewers don't really understand why, it's because all the things they are saying are admissions of weaknesses as a result of what they've seen the Russians do in the war with Ukraine. So at the moment, we don't have munitions and weapons stocks. Those all have been exhausted. We don't have the types of missile systems and the hypersonic missile systems that the Russians are using. Far from being stronger together, NATO has been revealed as a shambles that is unable to produce a coordinated reaction in support of Ukraine. We don't have a functioning defence industry, neither do the Germans. And what we've got here is apparently the UK and Germany coming together in order to try and rectify an absolutely disastrous situation. If we have a look at the document itself, which is mentioned on the Twitter post there by the Ministry of Defence, it's got this landmark UK-German defence agreement. But I'm just going to pull this out because this says it all. They are very excited because Rheinmetall, so this is nothing to do with British industry, this is a German company, will see the UK manufacture artillery gun barrels for the first time in 10 years. This is unbelievably pathetic because, of course, what the whole thing is admission that UK's defence is in a perilous state. The same with Germany. We cannot even manufacture gun barrels without having the Germans come in and bring a family. It's quite incredible. Let's have another look at a little video clip from the UK Ministry of Defence.
We know these are serious times. War in Europe, conflict in the Middle East, growing Russian aggression and increasing threats elsewhere. And as this world becomes more dangerous, we will rely more heavily on the professionalism and courage of our armed forces. And it is against this backdrop that the government is committed to renewing the nation's contract with those who serve. We've already been able to announce the largest pay increase for our forces in over 20 years, and I am the first Defence Secretary who can stand in this House and say everyone in uniform in the UK Armed Forces will be paid now at least the national minimum wage. And it's why we've announced in our first King's Speech legislation to introduce an independent Armed Forces Commissioner to improve service life for those service personnel and their families.
Well, the truth is, of course, we can't recruit sufficient numbers of young people to form an effective military backbone in UK. This is well known, it's highly publicised. But this Defence Secretary is congratulating himself because we can just manage to pay the people who do serve a minimum wage. This is such an insult, but it just shows that whilst Britain's military capability has been utterly destroyed and hollowed out from the inside. We've got the Defence Secretary crowing that he's putting it back together again with the Germans because now we're actually going to be able to produce some gun barrels. We will discuss this more in extra time. We're a bit short of time in the news, but if you're a paid-up member with UK Column, join us for extra and we'll talk more on this. But let's just move on a bit more to the subject of money. Ministry of Defence was pushing forward this HM Treasury tweet here, which says that we're confirming 2.26 billion in UK support for Ukraine from profits of on Russian assets. So let's put some comment in here. Basically, 15 billion in total going into Ukraine, but we've got no money for the UK, but we're happy to steal money from the Russians to help prolong the war in Ukraine, as long as it's Ukrainians and, of course, Russians that die. Here's the Ministry of Defence, and it's back on the subject of those nasty Russians. But this time they're reporting that the Russian Investigative Committee, that according to the Russian Investigative Committee, General Major Alexander Ogoblin has been arrested. And it goes on to talk about corruption and almost horror that the Russians are arresting people for corruption. It's all those nasty Russians. This goes on to say the second arrest demonstrates that Russian authorities continue to, quote, enthusiastically pursue corruption charges against serving and former defence officials. And it says that this behaviour is fundamental to the functioning of the Russian regime. Well, shock, horror, the Russians are investigating corruption and ultimately they're putting people in prison. Let's remember Debbie Evans' report from UK Column News on Friday, where she was talking out that we in UK now have to have a COVID corruption czar to get back what is owed to the British people, i.e. what has been stolen from the British people in bent contracts. And the figures were truly astounding. Debbie was talking about the £1 trillion pond of contracts that have gone out with regard to COVID. And basically the statistic was that 30.7 billion had been handed out, handed out in little brown envelopes, presumably, for contracts without any form of competition. So sheer hypocrisy from UK at the moment, as a finger is pointed at what's happening with the Russians. And then the other big boast was that we're doing something to interfere with the Russian actors that are using disinformation. And the UK got very excited because they've exposed the Social Design Agency, and they're accusing it of trying to incite anti-Ukraine protests across Europe. Well, the UK has been up to these tricks for years and always has been, and so have the other Western countries. Let's just end this little segment on war and defence with a little look at this army video.
We have 12,500 military ration packs and 79 battlefield medical kits, which will support the resilience of the courageous men and women of the LAF who are working under incredibly hard conditions as the conflict in Lebanon continues. This support comes amid the UK's continued efforts, working with partners and allies to call for an immediate ceasefire and de-escalation in the region. The LAF are integral to securing peace in Lebanon. For more than a decade, the UK has given critical support to the LAF, with whom we remain a strong and proud partner.
Well, I thought this was a very sad clip for a number of reasons. One is I think the lady is a sergeant major, getting her to read out what is clearly a political statement. She's clearly reading. This is nothing to do with her work. But we're putting a few ration packs into Lebanon at the same, with one hand. With the other hand, we're giving Israel the weapons to destroy the country. It's truly unbelievable. Alex, I better hand over to you before I have more to say on the hypocrisy that's become UK under this uniparty system.
I don't think I can top the clip you just showed there of German War Minister Boris Pistorius saying the Eastern Front is very important to me personally. But here is, as they say in Brussels, a tour de table of what's going on around the continent of Europe. For the first piece, I had to go, as you'll see in the show notes, to archive.is, because we're not supposed to read Sputnik International. It's a very naughty news source. There is an ally here of the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán called Endre Simo, who, perhaps with license from Orbán himself, he's not in Orbán's party directly, says that there is a European Commission plot to replace him through a colour revolution, fiddled elections, which would be in 2026. There is a chap with the unlikely name of Peter Magyar, which would directly translate as Peter the Hungarian, who seems to be put up for the Juan Guaido slot, if you compare it with Venezuela, the prime minister in waiting. It is just that the Hungarian voters haven't decided that yet, but they will, according to this allegation, be made to see sense soon. Over in Georgia, I reported on the tensions earlier in the year when I was in Tbilisi. People will be aware that there was a parliamentary election just in the last couple of weeks. What is happening right now is mercifully no street violence, but President Salome Zurabishvili, who actually grew up in France and was a French citizen most of her life, who came back to Georgian politics under Mikhail Saakashvili, now the president, who is at odds, at loggerheads with the parliamentary majority that forms the government, the Georgian Dream Party, ultimately backed by the alleged Russian oligarch Bidzina Ivanishvili. She has said that she doesn't need to provide evidence, furnish proof of her conviction that there was vote rigging à la Russe, in the Russian style, in the election. She says, we have prosecutors and investigators for things like that. So it's up to them to prove their innocence, not me to prove their guilt. We will see how this develops. Politico, in its Brussels branch, of course they're Washington-based as well, is reporting that the former Finnish President Sauli Niinistö, whom we have reported on in the past, we had a lady camped outside at the presidential office in Helsinki once, alleging that he was a thug in quite a remarkable episode. But Niinistö has become a president emeritus after more than a decade as head of state of Finland, which of course is now a NATO member state. And he has been commissioned in retirement from leading his country by Ursula von der Leyen in her second term now as commissioner to create a European CIA. And the guts of the article, of course, says that there is lip service paid to the idea of of security and defense being a national competence. But maybe that's only security, so henceforth not security and defence, because although there is a European External Action Service, a War Ministry and Foreign Ministry of the EU rolled into one, which is led by a High Commissioner, not directly by the EU Commission as such, from now on, there will be a Defence and Space Commissioner, or War and Space Supremacy Commissioner, if you're a bit more cynical, on the European Commission's lineup directly. This will be Andrius Kubilius of Lithuania, who will be working on developing, look at this, the European Defence Union. That would include the United Kingdom, of course, Brian, because we're in it. It's not synonymous here with the European Union member states. What else is going on? Ynet News, one of the biggest sources in Israel, has reported what was already picked up by others. There has been a scandal in Italy. A Milan-based private investigation firm called Equalize, as in perhaps to equalize the odds by fair means or foul, I don't know, which is composed of former defense and security officials in private higher capacity, has been caught by Italian state investigators hobnobbing with visiting Israelis. And it seems that what the Israelis wanted by the cutout of these Italian private detectives was dirt on Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni and ways to bribe Iran with regards to the oil and gas sector, and also information on the Wagner Group, this mysterious entity which may or may not be Russian hackers, may or may not be steered by other people. So that's quite important that a G7 and of course a big G7 member and a big hitter in the EU and in NATO is openly fighting such Mossad intrigue. Over in Spain, and I would urge people to look at the photographs embedded in this report. We can't, of course, show them all without breaking copyright. We can only screenshot pages. But we see that King Felipe, and indeed the Queen, who was mud-spattered as well, have gone to the site of this very mysterious and extreme death by mud and water that happened in Valencia in eastern Spain a few days ago. And you can see that that's the king there with his the back of his head visible in the camera shot. And these two gentlemen are Valencian residents yelling at the king. Of course, Spanish temperament and Spanish support for the royal family is not what we would expect in Britain, but it is fairly unprecedented. To give him his due, he kept his cool and stayed there. The allegation now, of course, is that the Spanish state was slow and the authorization of the army wasn't forthcoming to clear people's houses up when it could perhaps have saved livelihoods and saved homes and maybe even saved some lives. Very shocking and distressing things going on, of course, in Spain. And finishing in the Netherlands, because I'm based here, the coalition government led, dominated by Geert Wilders' party, PVV, has now announced its strictest asylum policy ever, In British terms, this will mean the removal of ILR, indefinite leave to remain. You'll always have the sword of Damocles above you as a refugee who's naturalised or given leave to remain. Various other measures, cells around the country, trying to target people as bogus asylum seekers, nasty messages in asylum centres, perhaps saying we're trying to get you back home. The big one that probably won't stick in international law is that the Dutch government now wishes to declare the bulk of Syria, which is where most asylum seekers come from in the Netherlands nowadays, declare the bulk a place that's safe to return to. But whether you can do that under international treaties is quite open to question. It's a territory of a country is either safe or not safe to return people to. But there we are. And at least on the surface, refugees and asylum seekers will no longer enjoy prominent priority on housing lists and social security lists above Dutch residents and natives who need that support.
Alex, thank you very much. And again, we'll talk more on that in extra time. Ben, let's bring you in because, of course, migrants is a problem affecting every country in Europe since the borders were deliberately opened. What are you looking at here?
Well, we're looking at large groups of unvetted fighting-age men being stationed around the country at taxpayer expense, and local people who are raising valid concerns about this are being ignored by public officials and cancelled and censored both in person and online. It's quite remarkable. We're going to look at Altrincham, which is a beautiful market town in North Cheshire, just 8 miles southwest of Manchester, which was actually founded in 1290. So it's got a long, long history, population of just over 50,000 people, beautiful market, beautiful industrial buildings from the Victorian era you can see here. And actually it's one of the nicest places to live in the country. And I was contacted by someone who lives there who will remain nameless for the purposes of this report via my Rise blog. And the reason for that was this development, which took place just a couple of weeks ago. And it's been confirmed that the Cresta Court Hotel in Altrincham has closed in order to house asylum seekers. And Altrincham today have revealed that the Altrincham Hotel had suddenly closed its doors for a period of 12 months with all existing bookings and parties cancelled without warning. So that includes weddings, people's birthdays, any plans that had been made in 2025 had been cancelled by the hotel. And this morning, referring to the article, they were able to confirm that the hotel, which has been a fixture of the hospitality scene since the 1970s, has agreed a deal with Serco, which manages asylum seeker housing for the Home Office. And apparently this decision is completely out of the council's hands. It's already been made and this has already been tied up. Now, Serco, interestingly, big international corporation, mainstay of the City of London, also delivering commercial revenue to the royal family, as Brian touched on earlier. So they seem to have their fingers in every single pie that we're talking about today. Cresta Hotels itself the Cresta Hotel is owned by Vine Hotels, which is this company, experts in hotel and venue management and development, the chairman of which, interestingly, is Greg Dyke, who was previously chairman of the FA. Let me just make that a little bit bigger for you. Chairman of the Football Association and the British Film Institute. He's a well-known media executive, journalist, broadcaster, and former Director General of the BBC. This is a very, very high-profile individual, and he is benefiting personally from this development, this contract that has been signed with Serco. Now, I mentioned there's been some opposition on the ground. That's being coordinated very capably by this gentleman, Councillor Nathan Evans, who is a Conservative councillor, who's been organising public meetings, but he's had 2 event venues cancelled, and he's experiencing a lot of censorship online as well. People really don't want the locals talking about this at all. And he released a very good little statement. I've taken a segment from that, which we're going to have a listen to now.
Despite hundreds of residents signing up within minutes to our secure ticketed event, the council refused to attend. The MP refused to attend. The police and the business community were happy to meet with residents, along with all 8 Conservative councillors. It appears our council is running away when it comes to listening to your concerns about the situation, and our MP is simply missing in action. We are hearing warm words about providing for the asylum seekers, but nothing when it comes to the genuine concerns of our residents around the proximity of the Cresta Court to many schools, the transport interchange, and of course, our town centre. It is unfair of the council to say they had no control of this. We have a Labour council, a Labour MP, a Labour government, and a Labour mayor. They hold all the levers of power, locally, regionally, and nationally. When this happened last year in Hale, our then MP, Graham Brady, intervened and the housing of single males was blocked and replaced by legitimately vulnerable families. It's also clear that certain social media forums are intent on sifting all discussion and deleting comments as residents raise genuine concerns.
So there was a statement made by the local MP, who's this fella here, Conor Rand. He says that I am proud to represent a constituency as diverse and tolerant as Altrincham and Sale West. However, I understand that there will be residents who have concerns about the private agreement reached between Best Western and Serco to temporarily house asylum seekers in Cresta Court Hotel. So he's thanking them for their tolerance, i.e. he wants them to shut up. And he's also pointing out that the agreement is a private agreement between Best Western and Serco, and obviously has nothing to do with the government. Quite remarkable. He continues to say, I have today written to the minister responsible for asylum to ask what steps they are taking to process these claims quickly and to ask what support the government will be providing to our community to deal with any increased demand on local services that this decision will bring. I'll update residents when I receive a response. And continues further, as residents will know, this is not the first time a hotel in our community has been needed to be used for this purpose. This is a result of the huge backlog that has developed in our asylum system over the last 14 years, with the number of asylum seekers waiting for a decision on their claim increasing from 19,000 to almost 119,000. And that means it's the Tories' fault, so you can't blame me. So Conor Rand, who is he? So this is him. He is a former Labour Party staffer. And then he was a researcher at the Union of Shop Distributive and Allied Workers. So he's very much a kind of left-wing figure, as you'd expect from a Labour MP. He's actually the first ever Labour MP in this constituency. And interestingly, he's not from the local area at all. He doesn't live there. And actually, it's possible that he lives much, much, much further afield. He was parachuted in earlier on this year ahead of the general election when the previous candidate resigned due to unspecified personal reasons. So this guy called Ben Hartley, he resigned from the campaign, and Conor Rand stepped in. And we have information from a Labour Party insider telling us that this was a decision made centrally in Labour HQ, right? So this is not a decision made by the local party or the local voters, right? And interestingly, again, as I kind of touched on a moment ago, it appears that he's not even from the area, doesn't actually have any kind of connection to the area. This came from a Facebook group, someone commenting that and this is unconfirmed, by the way, but he is from East Anglia. He studied there. His family connections are there. It seems that he lives in Norfolk, right? It's been rumoured that he lives in Norfolk, right? So he's not in the local area, which I think raises some really interesting questions about accountability and our ability to get our hands around, figuratively, our elected officials when things are going on in our local area. And interestingly, that Facebook group where that comment was taken from is run by a Labour Party staffer, and that person has been deleting comments, including, as I understand it, that comment, to deliberately stifle debate, right? This is really, really inappropriate. And we've got ourselves a situation where you've got 300 fighting age men from Libya and Eritrea and other parts of North Africa who've just been placed in the middle of Altrincham without any discussion whatsoever. Now, this is an ongoing matter. Nathan Evans has written to Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, and we'll report back as we see any kind of developments here. But effectively, he's asking them to explain what due diligence has been conducted regarding local schools and infrastructure. And there are 3 schools within a kilometre of this hotel, by the way. I don't think I mentioned that earlier in the report. What mapping exercises have been undertaken, and what risk assessments have been completed. And additionally, he would like further clarification on the decision to place single individual males rather than families, and whether the council and local MPs were given any prior notice of this engagement, because actually it appears that they haven't been.
Okay, Ben, serious subject. Of course, we know what mass migration is doing to countries in Western Europe. It's destroying them. Everybody suffers. That's the agenda, the breakdown of society. Let's talk about this a little bit more in extra time. Alex, bring you back for just some final comments on the law. Should we laugh or should we cry?
There's something from every part of the British Isles, every jurisdiction. Well, thank you to Ben first for that, because this is not the first time that Labour Party HQ down south has made a mistake and put its foot in it with Cheshire. They seem to regard Cheshire as a county that's up north that will respond well to dog whistles. So when the late lamented Gwyneth Dunwoody passed away from serving many years as Crewe and Nantwich MP, Labour went up there and campaigned with actors playing toffs in top hats, thinking this will go down well with the Northerners. But Cheshire is a rural Conservative county in essence, so that did not go down well at all. Right, so what's going on here? The Independent reports that, and this only applies to England and Wales, this nightmare order from many years ago called Imprisonment for Public Protection, IPP, is still an albatross around this country's neck, as we, or our great and good, like to bound around the world, telling other people how to rectify their inferior justice systems. There is a gentleman here who is living in a tent as a fugitive because the conditions of bail or staying out of jail for his IPP, and this is for the rest of his life, it's indefinite until someone in the justice system decides to change their mind. The sword of Damocles for him is you must not shack up again with your former partner. There are no legal or evidentiary standards for this. It's just we don't like it. You're being a menace. You're being riffraffed. Many other people who have had an IPP slapped on them before UN criticism stopped it, and some of these committed suicide in prison. It hasn't been retrospectively removed. It's just that it's not applied to new people anymore. Others, as I say, have committed suicide. But there are other cases where people have been told, if you ever get drunk again, if you're rude to somebody, you're going back to the slammer, and there's no end date for these IPPs. So let's just bear this in mind, because even among our audience, I don't think many people are aware that there is a category of people who are worse off than the Zeks of the Soviet Union, in that they have no release date for their life sentence. They must comply with the authorities in all of their bigotry. Otherwise, they're going away again. BBC was the first to report this, but others have since. In Scotland, which doesn't have IPPs, they are similarly perplexed with the state is perplexed with the response it has had to its proposal for juryless trials, something that Claire mentioned, Claire Wills-Harrison, at our recent event in Bristol, as an egregious error and abuse. So the Scottish government has understood now that even on the emotive issue of rape trials, where the argument was Scots law is for various reasons, like the corroboration rule preventing rape victims from getting justice, the solution is not juryless trials. Before that, the Scottish government, especially when Nicola Sturgeon took over with her particular version of feminism, the previous thing they did was try to write into legislation, and they got it passed as well in Holyrood, that the judges would direct juries in certain circumstances to convict people. Quite unprecedented, but we're not going to have juryless trials. If you're wondering whether this is just a one-off by people in Edinburgh, no, because 5 years ago, and with no particular connection to Scotland, Raconteur was hosting a piece by Rosalind Warren saying, should we have robot juries? Artificial intelligence, better than people? Well, of course, better in one way. They'll never say no to a judge. And then finally, the real and finally is from the two Irish jurisdictions. First, Northern Ireland. The Belfast Telegraph reports that Sinn Féin is flogging signed copies of Gerry Adams' cookbook for 50, it should be pounds actually, it's being sold south of the border, €50. It's called The Negotiator's Cookbook, and Moria Cahill is quoted in the article, a famous victim of the IRA, rape victim, as saying, do these scumbags have no sense of decency at all in their money making? Well, I think they enjoy the lifelong protection of both states, His Majesty's government and the Irish Republic, for services rendered over a long course of the Troubles. And down in Dublin, we have got this. It's really a bit of a downer for an and finally, but it's really so bad it's comedy. The Irish hate crime bill has passed. People will recall that the independent senator in Shannon Éireann, Sharon Keegan, spent nearly half an hour reading out the 72 genders named individually in that legislation, which has now gone through the Oireachtas, which will enjoy protection. The Irish government says nothing to worry about because there's no hate speech code, it's only hate crimes. But there you are, the Irish state now protects 72 gender identities.
Alex, thank you very much. That'll give our audience something to think about. We must end there. So big thank you to you, Alex, and Ben, for joining me today. That's the end of the news. If you're part of the paid up team for the UK column, please join us for Extra starting in a few minutes. But the news team will be back at 1 o'clock on Wednesday. See you then. Bye-bye.